Welcome to Business Talk here on businesstech.co.za. Today, we're focusing on the insurance industry. It's an often overlooked yet pivotal driver of economic stability and growth. But let's face it, nobody wakes up and says, yay, I'm going to go and buy insurance today. It's one of those purchases, but it is absolutely critical if we're to protect our assets, our income, and our health as well. Joining me is Zandile Makhoba, who's a lead specialist for research and insights at Liberty. Zandile brings over 14 years' experience across market research, investment banking, risk analysis, and economic consulting, making her the ideal guest to help us unpack the challenges and the opportunities for the insurance sector on the African continent. It's a great pleasure to have you on the show, Zandile. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you very much.
Now, let's just start by looking in the rearview mirror, and we already hear some of the Christmas jingles going up in stores. What were some of the common themes that defined 2024 and how they influenced the African economy, especially in sub-Saharan East and West Africa?
Well, it hasn't been an easy year coming off, some of the challenges that we have had over the past 3 to 5 years. But we are still a continent in recovery. So if we just looked at some of the developments in the western part of the continent, Nigeria and Ghana both dealing with both fiscal and monetary policy issues. So both seeing high inflation, Nigeria specifically, a very high interest rate environment. So it's been very difficult operating in that side of the world. In West Africa, we are continuing to see challenges on the fiscal front with over-indebtedness. That remains a continental conversation, but certainly one that's affecting that side of the world significantly. But we've also had, drought and weather conditions affecting the agricultural sector there, which has been significant. But it's actually shown an improvement this year. So they've been able to benefit from a recovery in the agricultural sector there. Overall, the continent is starting to come off the challenges that global disturbances have created. So the war, COVID, all of these have been external factors weighing heavily on the continent. We are now starting to see even South Africa easing interest rates after a prolonged period of interest rates being high, and a little bit of improvement in sentiment from the consumer and the business sector.
It was most emblematic when one saw Naira, the Nigerian Naira devalue, also in Egypt as well. Those currency devaluations have made it very difficult for those economies, often then faced with hyperinflation. And so I think it has been a challenging 2024 in the main. The drought, I was in Namibia recently, they are really struggling. It's a 1 in 100-year drought over there. Locally, the retail insurance market, I think South Africans are under pressure because I feel lots of queries as to, should I be shopping around for a better insurance deal? So what do you see as the key factors that have contributed to a very prolonged, difficult retail insurance market in South Africa?
So we have seen this rise of risks, which does mean that a lot more people are starting to maybe need insurance. We know that also economic performance has a negative impact on investment. So the capacity for insurers to be able to cover what they promise to consumers becomes strained. So we've got just that combination of high risk, which may result in higher demand, but also reduced capacity in the industry to cover. You'll remember during the COVID period, a lot of suppliers dropped off that retrenchment cover. This spike of challenge in the economy, many people losing their jobs. It does raise a concern around how well the industry would be able to cover some of those retrenchments. And so those who were already in remained covered, and those that were not could not get that cover. But that has come back and shifted. We are now in a better environment. The economy improving is a significant contribution to the industry being able to do more in this space. And consumers are right to look around. So fortunately, we are starting to see much more of a robust market in South Africa. There are options to consumers, and the affordability ranges are quite wide, which is a positive thing. We know from ASISA that, the insurance gap remains significant in South Africa, even though we are the most mature insurance market on the continent. So when we start to see more options coming up, it does offer clients more of an option. And insurance is certainly becoming more of an essential good to consumers. So that grudge seemingly has weakened over the years as consumers have seen how beneficial it is to have a safety net when things do go wrong.
And that's what insurance really is about. It's to ensure that, when life's little unexpected challenges happen, and they happen, that they don't become catastrophic to one financially. Africa really has the potential to become an economic powerhouse. I was in Kenya recently, and just listening to some of the innovations and some of the speakers talking about the demographic dividend that we have, the size of our agricultural land, our resources, yet we remain vulnerable, and we have done for decades. Can we talk about some of the emerging risks and challenges that we face and have the power to overcome that often deter economic progress?
100%. So you've already alluded to the environmental challenges, so global warming and the changes in terms of weather patterns is a significant risk for the continent, one that is very highly dependent on some of our primary sectors like agriculture and mining and so on. So the weather patterns play a significant role in the stability of some of our main economic pillars, and that does raise a big concern. The other one, which is a little bit more controllable, is some of the political challenges and fiscal challenges that the continent faces. So we've seen a lot around the debt issues, the debt crises, even defaults in some of the countries. Being able to stabilize around that would play a significant role in creating a sense of foundation for economies to begin showing some improvement. Conflict on the continent remains a big risk. One that does sometimes turn away potential business and investment that we need to look out for. But I think also over and above the challenges on the continent, there is starting to emerge some significant opportunities and continental collaboration, if I can put it that way. So the African Free Trade Zone is a very good opportunity for the sub-Saharan region. And we are starting to see more trade happening between countries in this part of the world. What this has also inspired is a lot more infrastructure investment across the continent. So if we're going to move goods around, what do we need to do in the port? What do we need to do for inland transportation and air transport? We are starting to see some of those projects happening gradually, bringing investment into the continent and really seeing Africa support itself towards stable economic growth that is not dependent on what happens on the outside.
Yeah, that improved intra-African trade, which is so low by global standards. And it's the tariff barriers. They've come down largely with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, but it's the non-tariff barriers. It's how long it takes you to move from country to A to country B and move goods cross-border, common labeling, all of those things. But it's really encouraging that we're starting to talk a lot more about how we solve some of those challenges. When it comes to insurance, I was looking at some research from the Brookings Institute, and it characterizes insurance as an often overlooked but nonetheless crucial behind-the-scenes factor driving growth at all levels of society, and from the family all the way to massive infrastructure projects to big tech developments. And I think Africa, the continent arguably most exposed to the risks and ravages of a changing climate and economic uncertainty, is sadly also the continent least protected by insurance instruments. I think our insurance penetration is somewhere around 3% of the continent's GDP. The global average is around 7%, and premiums per capita are 11-fold lower than the world average. So let's just unpack that for a little bit. What are the factors impacting this low penetration of insurance on the continent?
Think about the household level. A lot of African countries have struggled in the past to develop a substantial middle market. And if you really look at the insurance product, it is one that is sold to sort of your middle market, middle income household going up to upper affluent and so on. So when economies are still grappling with high levels of poverty and low income, it's very hard to try and sell insurance when you're dealing with bread and butter issues. Over the years, we are seeing solid growth in terms of the middle class on the continent. And with that is coming improved demand for household insurance from property to person. But also what we're seeing is that from a non-household or rather business side of things, the insurance need is definitely growing, especially because there's such an entrepreneurial spirit on the continent. A lot of business activity does come from small businesses. And I think with the combination of risks that a lot of businesses are seeing, the need for insurance is coming up. So you'll see with a lot of South African insurance providers, one of the key growth vectors is starting to see how we can solve for insurance on the continent. There are different pricing issues, environmental issues, political issues. And, insurance is a pricing or evaluation of risk and the likelihood of that happening. So as the data becomes better in terms of understanding some of those risks, that will also improve our ability to insure both businesses and people on the continent. And this happens at a especially unique time in that we are now getting better ways of collecting data, interpreting and understanding it. We're seeing how technology and the adoption of internet across the continent is growing, which does make all of this very much easier.
And, I'm thinking here of what we saw in Florida recently with, the double whammy of hurricanes and a lot of talk around that region now with mortgages becoming almost uninsurable because of the climate risks, moving from a 1 in 200, 1 in 100 year event to a 1 in 20, 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 5 year event, and the big ramifications that has for mortgages, for example. What role can insurance play when we think of it in protecting and driving Africa's economy? And maybe you could just give us some practical examples of how different sectors and countries can benefit from insurance, both short-term and long-term.
So insurance is there to deal with the risks that we are not anticipating, as we've already touched on. And I think it's really that safety net that insurance provides that makes a difference. For example, if you're a business owner in the agricultural space, there's really little to know in terms of how environmental changes will affect your crop or your cattle. But having insurance in that space specialized around agriculture does make sure that when challenges do happen, people are able to make sure that they are not worse off than what they would have been without that disaster. And so you are able to preserve a growing business through that kind of insurance. And, that's a business level example. At household level, it's the same thing. We've seen various hailstorms and floods in the South African space, and many people losing their cars because they were uninsured. And those that had insurance are able to either repair or at least make sure that they have another vehicle. And just that vehicle example on its own, your ability to move around is so closely linked to your financial stability in a place like South Africa, where getting to work is quite critical. Being able to move around might be critical to your work. So from very short-term insurance that just preserves our things, right up to something like life insurance that allows you to leave something substantial for your children, for your family when you are no longer available. It allows families, especially on the African continent, to just create a solid foundation from which to start on. something that hasn't always been there, especially if we look at the history of the continent and some of the challenges socially that we have experienced.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on it, the fact that life insurance can play a lead role in ending pervasive intergenerational poverty in Africa.
100%.
But if affordability is the biggest barrier, how can the insurance industry reimagine life insurance products so that they become more inclusive? Because I think what the industry needs to do is to ensure that we're providing access and products and services that are tailored to the unique needs of Africa. And so much of our economy in Africa is still in the informal sector, for example. So how do you see the industry trying to reimagine this route to market?
I want to be bold enough to say actuarials could be more creative. And I think that's what we're starting to see in the market. When we start to rethink insurance and really start to understand some of the immediate challenges that people are facing, it does allow us to create better suitable products. And I'm highly inspired by what we've seen with the likes of Lusaka on the continent. So they're a fintech company that collects data for micro businesses, really informal structures that are, vending on the side of the road, and they give them devices so that they can track their trade. And with that data, they are then able to extend levels of credit to them. With that kind of insight and partnerships with that type of business, I think insurers would be able to start to rethink and reimagine solutions for the continent, and also some of the nuances for different countries. What might be suitable in South Africa might not work in Kenya or Nigeria, but we'll start to understand that by leveraging the data that is on the ground, and then responding to it in a smart way, by learning from the data that we then collect.
Yeah, and I think we have to take such a nuanced and granular approach to it. You can't just say, well, this will work because it worked in South Africa, it'll work in East Africa. I think the markets are all different. And even within regions, be it the East or West African, there are subtle differences within the region. So you really have to be led by the data. I think currently, though, looking at South Africa, many South Africans are feeling the pinch. And it's been further highlighted by the two-pot withdrawals that we've seen, just staggering amounts of members going to their retirement savings, which are ultimately long-term savings for retirement, but being forced to dip into them for whatever reason, paying off debt. We certainly hope it's not just to take a holiday, because that would be the wrong reason. But I do think it shows you that South Africans are under financial pressure. There's this constrained economy. I know things are starting to improve. The very high unemployment rates. Where do you think in the hierarchy of needs do we see insurance falling? And what risks does it leave South Africans exposed to?
Many households have had to come to the point of evaluating what is most essential. And I think we touched a little bit on this point. If you are debating between bread and insurance, the chances are insurance is not going to survive. And yeah, it's been inflation. It's been a high interest rate environment. Insurance sometimes doesn't make it into the, priorities when it comes to the day-to-day expenses that many households are experiencing. The difference, though, is that as the insurance industry has evolved, it's now an option to downgrade as opposed to completely cancel insurance policies. And I think a lot of consumers are starting to look at that as an option as opposed to completely dropping out of the insurance, because it remains something that they see value in. The other one that we spoke a little bit about is shopping around and looking for a better premium when that time comes. And, we can speak of the likes of Hippo and other search engines that allow us to make some comparisons around what is a good rate at this point in time in my life. That too is contributing positively to what we're seeing in terms of affordability in the industry. The last one is the role that technology is playing. So, reduced underwriting expenses, using technology to evaluate levels of risk. Those are all very beneficial to the consumer at the end of the day. And where possible, I think consumers should tap into those options to be able to reduce their financial burden.
It's so interesting, Zandile, because, we talk about this hierarchy and where it might sit on the needs because we're under so much financial strain. But you go out there and you ask someone if they've got a funeral policy. And I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 will say, we've got a funeral policy. Yet only 1 out of 10 South African consumers has life insurance. And if you look at it, there was a 2019 insurance gap report by CISA that calculated South Africans have a total life insurance shortfall of just under 35 trillion rand. It's a staggering amount. And on average, we've got around 600,000 rand of life cover. So how can we cultivate a culture around life insurance akin to what we see when it comes to funeral cover? Because clearly, it's not that people don't know what insurance is all about. They take out funeral policies. They just don't take out life policies. How do we do this?
You raise a very interesting point, and it also taps into some of the different uses that people are starting to do with insurance policies. For example, there are individuals who will take out policies but not use that for the funeral. When a death does happen in the family, that claim is then used for other means. And that is exactly what life insurance is. Right? It's not supposed to be there for the person who's deceased, but for those that they leave behind. And I think it's a very good lesson to the industry in terms of just creating the right options. So if we're not creating affordability for the consumer will create affordability for themselves. So is it a question of saying, can we start developing a life cover product at a different payout level, which then allows consumers to be able to afford it. And then it will also take away some of the controversy around how life cover is used. Because to your point, life cover is something that is affordable to the consumer. That's why they have it. But how they use it becomes quite a different story.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for innovation in this area in particular, and probably the single biggest solution that we can offer to ensuring that we get people out of intergenerational poverty, to ensure that we insure ourselves and leave something for the next generation so they're not starting on zero again. And then we can start to see real progress across the African continent. So much more to talk about, Zandile. Thank you so much. That wraps up a fantastic discussion on the role of insurance in driving growth across Africa. A big thank you to Zandile Makhoba from Liberty for sharing her expertise. Be sure to stay tuned to Business Talk on businesstech.co.za for more conversations that matter. Until next time, I'm Michael Avery.